Hi, my name's Franz Hartmann. I'm the Executive Director of Earthroots Canada, and welcome to Earthroots' first 2022 provincial election video podcast. It's Thursday, April 21st, and joining me is Earthroots Board Chair and former Environment Commissioner of Ontario from 2000 to 2015, Gord Miller. Welcome, Gord.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Okay, before we launch into today's topic, let me tell viewers a bit about what to expect in these video podcasts. Between now and Election Day on June 2nd, we hope to offer you some very informed analysis, sprinkled with lots of wisdom and the occasional opinion about some of the key environmental issues facing Ontario voters. Each episode is organized around a question that we think voters who care about the environment are probably asking themselves. And then we're going to turn our focus to an environmental issue that's been in the media over the past week to get Gord's perspective on it. And then we're going to end with Gord answering questions that have been submitted by you. Okay, so let's start. So today's episode is focused on this question: why is there so much conflict over highways? And before I ask Gord to answer this, let me spend a moment reviewing the government's plans to build two new highways in the Greenbelt, the so-called Highway 413 and the Bradford Bypass. And just to help people who may not know about this, I'm just going to pull up on the screen a map. So here we go. So these two maps, the first one, thanks to Environmental Defense, and the one on the left, right is thanks to the Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition, give a good sense of both highways. Highway 413, the one on the left, it starts at the top right. You see that? That's Highway 400, just south of the King Road exit. And then it winds its way to the south and to the west, eventually to join Highway 401, roughly where the 401 meets the 407. The highway on the right, the so-called Bradford Bypass, also known as the Holland Marsh Highway, is to start at Highway 400, just west of Bradford, and it goes pretty well due east to Highway 404. So, Gord, let's start with the conflict. Why is there a conflict around the building of these highways?
Because they haven't got the people's consent. There's been no consultation. There's been no effort to get informed consult by the people. You know, we have in Ontario a very progressive, it's from the 1970s, my gosh, we had an Environmental Assessment Act, the first in Canada, so one of the first in the world, and it had it's a very basic and excellent structure. And the first question when you do an environmental assessment is, what is the need? Why are we doing this? What is the need? And if you satisfy that question and say, okay, well, maybe there's a need, then what are the alternative ways of meeting that need? That's the essence of this. And for these highways, well, first of all, what is the need? You know, supposedly it's to alleviate, we'll get to that a little later, but I think alleviate traffic density. But really, if it's from going from Bradford or from the 400 over to the 404, that doesn't sound like a commuter distance thing. Or maybe it could be handled with an expansion of the GO service, which would be greatly appreciated by a lot of communities, I think. But nowhere has the government explained what is the need we're addressing, what are the alternative ways of addressing need, and why they end up with highways. And that's the essence of this conflict is, why are we doing this? And they don't have an answer. They haven't given us an answer.
Right. And what should have happened on the normal course? What should have happened?
Well, it should be, at the very least, an environmental assessment. So it starts a full environmental assessment. And we should insert here that under the Bradford bypass, for instance, there was an environmental assessment done back in the 90s. It's way out of date. It has to be, but the government has decided, actively announced, they're not doing an environmental assessment on that Bradford bypass. I mean, they're not doing it. Okay, so what should happen is there should be, and that's actually the law in Ontario, that they should start, oh, why are we doing this? What is the need? What are the ways we could address that need? What are some of the, so once we've decided, if we've gone through that process, well, it has to be a highway, it has to be a Bradford bypass. Oh, okay. Well, then let's look at all the impacts of the Bradford bypass. Let's look at when we're gonna make a commitment of billions of dollars and some environmental consequences of significance. Is it worth it? Are we getting it? That's what an environmental assessment process is. Consult the people. bond or inform them and get their consent. People will give your consent to do things, some of these projects, if they really feel that they're necessary and valuable. They'll say, well, yes, we would have to make some sacrifices of money or the environment, but why are we doing this?
Yeah. So bottom line, they haven't done well, they did an assessment back in the late 1990s. It hasn't been updated, and they've actively, said we don't want to do it. I mean, some could argue, well, why bother? We kind of know what the environmental impact is. It seems to be straightforward. They did this in the 1990s. Why redo it? What would they find out that they don't already know?
The project in the 1990s was different. The landscape was different. The level of, we don't know what the environmental consequences of this highway is. They have made a decision and announced that they're not going to do an environmental assessment. So people can't say, well, we're concerned about the Holland Marsh and the wetlands. We're concerned about the endangered species. And you should be concerned about this. Is the impact significant? We don't know. They won't do the work. They won't do the environmental assessment. If you go to people and say, look, it's going to affect the red-headed woodpecker habitat, it's going to affect the Holland Marsh, it's going to affect it, but we still think, given all this information of the effect, we still think it's worthwhile doing. Well, maybe people would be, accept that and just say, well, that's a justified initiative. But no, what they've said is, we won't document what the environmental impact is. You, the people, won't know. You might have your suspicions, you may have your concerns, but you'll never know by professional analysis what the effect of this highway is. You just got to suck it up and do what we say.
Well, so from my reading, and I've been following this for quite some time for a number of reasons. My sense is the Premier has essentially made it very clear that he thinks these highways are necessary, and his justification is, this is needed for the Ontario economy to thrive. He doesn't want to, see the economy get stuck in a traffic jam and congestion. In other words, he's suggesting, according to how I'm reading this, that the environmental sacrifice that will come from building these highways is absolutely necessary for the sake of the economy, and he would also argue jobs. Now, you spent 15 years as Environment Commissioner. What's your take on this argument that we have to sacrifice the environment in order to make sure that the economy thrives?
Of course, this is deflection. This is the Premier making this big sales job on what's this really for. Let's look very candidly at what's going on here. If you notice that on the 413, you notice small little blips on the red line. Those are all the interchanges that are going to be on this highway. Why are there interchanges? What's that got to do with moving traffic? No, it's to do with building subdivisions. These projects are to open up lands that are owned by big developers now. They're already owned, but they're of little value now because there's no good highway access. They want to build this highway to make those lands suitable for large-scale subdivision development, sprawl, if you like, and make those developers extremely wealthy. And if you look at the contribution list to the Premier's political contribution, you'll find some names of some developers from time to time, in fact, with some big dollar items beside. This is about building houses. It's not really about highways. It's about the public of Ontario paying for roads so that developers can develop their lands and make billions of dollars.
Yeah. And so I hope it's obvious to our viewers what the answer to this question is, but I think it's important for just to make it clear for people who may be new to Earthroots. So why is Earthroots involved in this?
Well, Earthroots is involved because Earthroots is committed to the public participating in government decisions about the environment. We've been for decades now. We've been pursuing this. We've been pursuing when things are posted on the Environmental Bill of Rights. We let our membership know this. We tell them out, hey, you want to comment on this issue? This is what the government's planning to do, whether it be a policy or a project like this. So we're deeply involved in how the government makes the policy decisions that impact the environment in Ontario. And this is, of course, a big one that happens to be currently happening in Southern Ontario. There are many others all through Northern Ontario and other parts, but Earthroots is very much on top of government decision as it impacts the environment, because that's where the major environmental impacts are.
Great. So viewers are probably asking themselves, what can we do to stop these highways? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, the first thing is to get get the public discussion going. I mean, talk it up. Talk it up the fact that I think the key point here is that there is no proper environmental assessment, and environmental assessment is in place so that the people of Ontario make their rights. The Environmental Assessment Act says it's for the betterment of the people of Ontario. Well, that's what the active purpose is, and it lays out a plan. And these things are supposed to be subject to environmental assessment. And the reason you can tell your friends and your colleagues and your social media, you can say, look, we don't know the impact of this. This hasn't been properly done. They haven't consulted us. They haven't, as they are required to do by law. And we, they do not have our consent, and they shouldn't have your consent. That's the message that has to go out.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, talk to your friends and family. Tell them that you think the highway expansion into the Greenbelt through the Greenbelt is expensive, destructive, unnecessary. Use your social media channels to spread the words. We've got a lot of posts through the Earthroots social media channels. Feel free to spread those. There's a lot of other groups. There are a lot of other groups in Ontario working on this, environmental groups. Connect with them. Finally, consider voting for a candidate in a political party that is not going to build these highways. Okay, so let's move on to a discussion of an environmental issue that's been in the news this week. Gord, what about the report that was released on Sunday in the middle of a long weekend, the first long weekend of the year, that announced that the province will revise how it meets its climate reduction targets? What did you make of that?
Interesting. We haven't heard anything on climate since 2018 from this government, and 6 weeks before the election, they offered a revised climate policy. Isn't that interesting? Well, I don't think very much of it. I mean, I looked at it. You recall that I was the environment commissioner, and when the McGuinty government was in, they actually passed legislation requiring that the environmental commissioner of the day separately and uniquely report to the Legislative Assembly each year on the success of the government at meeting its greenhouse gas and climate change initiatives. So I did a separate report from my other reports each year to the government. Well, the first thing the Ford government did, of course, when it got in, was get rid of the role of the environmental commissioner, and with it, all the accountability as it related to climate change. So, it's fine and dandy for them to come up with a plan. It relies on trying to meet its target for 2030, which is lower, contains more emissions than the federal target, but nonetheless, it's the target they've chosen. And they rely on emission performance standards and gasoline renewable content, basically alcohol in the fuel. But the point is, it's not the plan so much, it's how will we know it worked or is working? Because no one's checking. They're in the old system before they eliminated the environmental commissioner's role. They're in the coming 4-year period, assuming this government gets elected, there would be, or any other government got elected, there would be 4 annual reports to the Legislative Assembly by an independent officer of Parliament that says, here's where the government is in meeting its greenhouse gas emission and climate change goals. And we know on an ongoing basis. That was the strength of what that McGuinty government initiative did way back in the day. But we don't know, and we won't know. So they can say whatever they please, and they can promise this going forward. Look, we've projected this line all the way forward to 2030 and show how we're going to meet our emissions. Who's checking? Who's going to call them to task? How will not just you, the people, know? How will even the opposition members know? How will anybody know in Parliament how it's going? And that's the crime here, is that they've wiped out the accountability on climate change and greenhouse gas emission planning.
Strong words, but I think a very, very good analysis. Well, then let's end with a question that was submitted to us from an Earthroots supporter. Sue wrote to us, she said, "It's difficult not being pessimistic about the environmental future of Ontario. The Doug Ford government has been doing terrible damage to the environment over the past 4 years, but many of the people I speak to think he's done an okay job as premier. How can I convince these people that any good he's done in other areas is completely wiped out by the damage he's doing to the environment?"
Well, there's 2 ways. I got 2 points on this. The first one is there's something circulating on YouTube. It's called Doug Ford's Climate and Conservation Calamities. And it's a video put together by, well, we're not even going to say, that's not even knowledge. Just there are a variety of different groups who have been impacted by Doug Ford's calamities and policies. And it's a great summary, very effective, very punchy. So it's right on YouTube, still searchable. I checked it just before this broadcast. Doug Ford's Climate and Conservation Calamities. That gets you your arguments concisely put forward. There's the ammunition. But the point is, we're 6 weeks from an election. This is an election year. And what are the issues being discussed in the election? Have you noticed any? I haven't. There's a wide open field, okay? In the sense that everybody should write into every local newspaper, call up your radio station when they have those kind of features, and go to the election debates and raise the question, what about your environmental record? What are you doing for the environment? What about climate change? Pick your topic, something on environment, raise this, make environment the go-to environmental issue for this election. It's wide open. I'll tell you right now, there is no issue. There is no discussion. It's going to be talking about affordable housing. Well, we always talk about affordable housing. We know that housing's not affordable. And we also know the government's not going to do anything about it. We have an opportunity to make environment the key issue of this election, and we should do that.
There it is. There are your marching orders from the former Environment Commissioner. Thank you, Gord. Well, that's it for Earthroots' first 2022 provincial election podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and more importantly, that you learned something useful. And if you did, please share this link with your friends and family. Join us next week for another episode, and send us your questions that you'd like Gord to answer for that episode. So finally, we would love to hear your comments or questions about this episode and what we should talk about and what we did talk about. Reach out to us via social media, our social media channels, Twitter and Facebook, or send me an email. You can reach me at Franz, F-R-A-N-Z, at earthroots.org. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.